Have you ever found the absolute perfect new home? Like, you know the scenario. You've been scrolling through listings for months, and suddenly there it is.
Oh yeah, the unicorn listing.
Exactly. The rent is unbelievably cheap. The street is lined with these mature oak trees. It feels perfectly, blissfully quiet.
The neighbors are probably waving from their pristine manicured lawns.
Yeah,
Right.
it checks every single box on your impossibly demanding list, and you are just feeling incredibly lucky. So you sign the lease, you get the keys. But then right in the middle of unpacking, surrounded by cardboard boxes, you look out your new living room window and you realize something is deeply, deeply wrong.
Yeah, that universal feeling of a perfect deal hiding a dark secret.
It's an anxiety almost everyone can relate to. And it happens to be the exact psychological trap weaponized by one of the most unusual and honestly brilliant educational tools we have ever encountered for this deep dive.
It really is the classic real estate nightmare, the hidden cost of the perfect deal. And what makes it so compelling is how universal that fear is.
Oh, for sure.
We all understand the concept of a catch. When something is too good to be true, our brains just naturally start scanning the environment for the threat.
Yeah, you're waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Exactly. But what happens when that threat isn't, it's not a leaky roof or a noisy highway, but something that fundamentally breaks the rules of reality, because that is the exact space this audio experience forces the listener into.
That is precisely what we're looking at today. We are exploring an audio recording titled Bedtime Story Learning English, Episode 04. And specifically, it's a 35-minute narrative called The House at the End of the Street.
Right.
And on paper, this is categorized as a beginner-level English learning tool. It features a narrator and a couple named Alex and Sarah, who have just moved into that exact perfect home scenario we just talked about.
And that categorization, the beginner level tool label, that is what makes this an absolute masterpiece of instructional design.
How so?
Well, usually when we think of beginner language learning, what do we picture?
Flashcards, repetitive dialogues.
Exactly. Sterile dialogues about ordering coffee or, asking for directions to the library. The cognitive load for an adult learning a new language is immense. You are entirely stripped of your fluency, your wit.
Yeah, your ability to express complex thoughts.
Right. You are made entirely vulnerable.
And this narrative takes that linguistic vulnerability and deliberately pairs it with the psychological vulnerability of a horror story.
Right.
It strips away all the complex metaphors and high-level vocabulary, and it just hits you right in the primal brain.
It's incredibly effective.
The setup alone establishes this mood instantly. The audio begins with this incredibly deep, slow voice. And underneath the voice, there is this low, pulsing, mysterious music.
Setting the stage right away.
Yeah, and the narrator actually gives you, the listener, specific instructions before the story even begins. He tells you to turn off the lights in your room.
Which is wild for a language lesson.
Right. He tells you to get comfortable, but only, quote, if you are brave enough. And then he asks a direct, chilling question. Do you believe in ghosts?
It's a fascinating immersion technique. By commanding the listener to turn off the lights, the narrator is collapsing the distance between the safe, well-lit environment of a typical study session and the dark, unpredictable environment of the fiction.
You're definitely not just a detached observer studying syntax anymore.
No, not at all. You are actively participating in an experience. And historically, if we look back at the origins of pedagogy, this isn't entirely new.
Wait, really? Like using fear to teach?
Yeah, think of the Brothers Grimm. Fairy tales were originally brutal, terrifying stories designed to teach children the fundamental rules of survival.
Oh, right. Like, don't stray from the path, don't talk to strangers.
Exactly. Fear is a highly effective teacher. And this recording is taking that ancient pedagogical tradition and applying it to adult language acquisition.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the way it builds dread using such basic building blocks is just incredible. We start right at the beginning of the narrative with Alex and Sarah. The audio design drops us right into their reality.
The mundane reality.
Yeah, we hear the rumble of a moving truck. We hear the heavy thump of boxes being set down on hardwood floors. It's a universally understood task.
And that grounding in the mundane is essential. If you start a story at an 11 on the tension scale, the listener just becomes numb.
Right, you need somewhere to go.
You have to establish a baseline of normalcy first. You have to give the brain a recognizable pattern before you disrupt it.
And the dialogue establishes that pattern beautifully. Alex asks Sarah, which box has the kitchen things? And Sarah replies, with that classic exasperation of a long-moving day, The one that says kitchen on it, Alex.
It's so relatable.
It is. It's simple, it's grounded, and it immediately establishes their dynamic. They're exhausted, they're bickering a little bit, but fundamentally, they're happy.
They're in the honeymoon phase with the house.
Right. They talk about the quiet street, the friendly neighbors who wave to them, and they specifically mention how cheap the rent is.
Notice the linguistic structure there, too. The recording is teaching basic nouns and adjectives. Box, kitchen, quiet, cheap.
Very foundational words.
Exactly. But it's doing so by painting a picture of comfort. It is deliberately lulling the listener into a false sense of security, which matches the character's own sense of relief at having found this perfect apartment.
But of course, that relief is incredibly short-lived. The anomaly is introduced almost immediately.
Here we go.
Alex is looking out the window, just taking in the neighborhood, and he spots it. And he describes it using very basic foundational adjectives again. He notes that while all the other houses on the street are new and clean, there is one house at the very end of the street.
That contrast.
Yes, it is old, it is dark. He says the windows are all black, there are no curtains, no lights. And then Alex delivers this line, "It feels strange," like it is watching.
And this is where we see the structural genius of using beginner-level English. Language learning relies heavily on teaching binary opposites.
Like up and down, hot and cold.
Exactly. And here, the lesson uses binaries to construct the architecture of horror. We have the new apartment versus the old house.
The clean street versus the dark anomaly.
Right. We have the entirely mundane, concrete reality of a cardboard box labeled kitchen sitting in direct opposition to the abstract, supernatural feeling of a house that is watching.
That is so clever.
It is. The pedagogy is doing double duty. It's teaching antonyms, but it's using those antonyms to create an immediate visceral sense of unease.
And Sarah's immediate reaction is pure, unfiltered denial. She says, "Alex, houses do not watch people."
Which is perfectly logical.
Right. She tries to rationalize the dark windows by saying maybe nobody lives there. She is desperately trying to protect the illusion of their perfect new home.
It's not just protecting the illusion, though. It's a fundamental neurological response.
How do you mean?
Well, when faced with an anomaly that threatens our safety, the brain has to make a calculation. Entering a state of high alert, like fight or flight, is biologically expensive.
It burns a lot of energy.
A tremendous amount. So if the brain can find a way to categorize the anomaly as harmless, it will absolutely do so to conserve resources. Cognitive dissonance kicks in.
So Sarah's just overriding her own instincts.
Precisely. Sarah is presented with sensory information that doesn't fit her paradigm of a safe neighborhood, so her brain simply rejects the information. Houses do not watch people. It's a logical statement used as a shield against an illogical reality.
But the environment refuses to let them stay comfortable behind that shield because the narrative transitions to later that night. The audio design strips away all the comforting sounds of the moving day.
No more trucks or friendly waves.
Exactly. There's no truck, no neighbors. It's just a very quiet, very isolated sound of wind. And Sarah wakes Alex up. She's whispering, which instantly forces you to lean in and pay closer attention. She says she hears something.
That transition from waking life to the middle of the night is a critical threshold in horror.
Another binary opposite.
Yes. Awake versus asleep. During the day, they had agency. They were moving boxes, making decisions, occupying space.
But in sleep, they're completely passive.
They are vulnerable. And it is precisely in that vulnerable state that the anomaly chooses to intrude.
And what she hears is so specific and honestly, so much scarier than a traditional horror sound effect.
It's not a jump scare.
Right, it's not a loud crash or a scream. She describes hearing music, very old music. She says it sounds like from a music box, and it's coming from outside.
Ooh, that's creepy.
And Alex groggily asks what time it is, and Sarah delivers the detail that anchors the dread. She says, 3 in the morning.
The psychology of 3 in the morning is deeply embedded in human biology and folklore.
The witching hour.
Exactly. But biologically speaking, 3 a.m. is the trough of the human circadian rhythm. It's when our core body temperature is at its lowest and our melatonin levels are peaking.
So you're at your absolute most sluggish.
Right. If you are forcibly awakened at 3 a.m., your brain is sluggish, your cognitive faculties are impaired, and your sense of isolation is absolute. You are awake while the rest of your hemisphere is unconscious. You are totally alone in the dark.
And to pair that profound biological isolation with the sound of a music box, that is a brilliantly insidious choice.
It relies on the psychological principle of corrupted innocence. Think about what a music box is.
It's a toy. It's for babies.
It's an object inextricably linked to childhood, nurseries, and the safety of sleep. It has this delicate, mechanical, repetitive sound.
And taking that and putting it outside in the cold.
Yes. Taking that specific auditory symbol of safety and placing it outside, coming from an abandoned, blacked-out house at the lowest point of the human circadian cycle.
It creates massive cognitive friction.
Exactly. The brain recognizes the sound as safe, but the context screams danger. That friction is the very essence of psychological terror.
Wow.
Furthermore, a music box is mechanical. It plays the same tune over and over, trapped in its own loop. It cannot deviate.
Oh, that's a great point.
That mechanical repetition subliminally hints at the theme of stasis that we discover later in the narrative.
I didn't even think about the loop aspect. So Alex gets out of bed, he goes to the window, and he looks down the street. And he sees a single light on in the top floor window of that dark house.
Yeah.
The house that, just hours ago, was completely dead.
And how does Sarah react to this physical proof?
This is the crazy part. She joins him at the window. She looks directly at the inexplicable light, and she says, "Let's go back to bed. It is probably just a new neighbor."
The denial is strong.
See, this is where I have to step in and question human survival instincts. I mean, the incredibly cheap rent was already a massive red flag. Now you have a creepy, tinkly music box playing at 3 a.m., accompanied by a single light in an otherwise abandoned pitch-black house.
It's a lot of red flags.
Think about your own home. If you looked out your window right now and saw that, at what point do you stop rationalizing? Why are we, as a species, so desperate to explain away things that are clearly dangerous? Sarah's looking at a situation that practically screams horror movie setup, and she is stubbornly insisting it's just a guy who likes old music boxes moving in at 3 in the morning.
I get that you're frustrated with her, but Sarah's reaction is intensely realistic. You have to acknowledge the alternative.
Which is admitting they're in danger.
Right. If she admits that the music box and the light are supernatural or malicious, she has to admit that her brand new home is a trap. She has to pack up all those boxes she just unpacked, break her lease, lose her money, and flee into the night.
That is a massive hassle, yeah.
The human brain will perform incredible gymnastics to avoid that level of upheaval. It is much easier for her mind to construct a highly improbable, deeply weird, but biologically natural scenario like an eccentric new neighbor than to accept the reality that she has moved her family into a zone of danger.
Well, Alex, thankfully, is not willing to do those mental gymnastics. He points out the absurdity of her logic immediately. He just says, at 3 in the morning, playing a music box.
Not buying it.
Not at all. And the syntax is so stark, there is no flowery debate. He just presents the raw facts, and the logic is inescapable. And Sarah has no counter-argument. Her only response is to retreat further into denial. She just repeats, "Let's go back to bed." She's completely shutting down her own perception because she cannot process the anomaly.
And going back to sleep is the ultimate manifestation of turning a blind eye. She is literally choosing unconsciousness over confrontation.
But the reality of a new home is that the sun always comes up. You can't sleep forever. And when we move into the daylight in the narrative, the situation doesn't improve.
No, it gets worse.
Which is strange, right? Usually in horror, the daytime is a reprise. The monsters hide from the sun. But here, the harsh light of day only makes the threat more concrete, especially when they encounter the neighborhood's unofficial historian.
The transition here is masterful because it actively plays with the listener's expectations. We expect the bright sunshine and the singing birds to reset the tension to zero.
Right. And the audio actually gives us those exact sounds. Birds chirping brightly, the clinking of coffee cups. Sarah's made coffee, and she is aggressively clinging to the normalcy of the morning routine.
She wants to pretend the night never happened.
Exactly. But Alex is stuck on it. He looks out the window again, studying the street, and he notices a new detail about the anomaly. He points out that every single house on their street has a beautiful garden full of bright flowers. But the garden of the dark house at the end of the street has only dead, brown grass and black leafless trees.
This is classic environmental storytelling, and again, it's utilized to teach descriptive vocabulary.
The antonyms again.
Yes. We have flowers versus dead grass, a living ecosystem versus a dead property. But conceptually, it introduces the idea that the house is not just a building. It is a localized zone of decay.
It's infecting the area.
Exactly. Whatever is inside that house is so toxic, so deeply wrong, that it is leaching the life out of the soil around it. It's radiating a localized blight.
And just as Sarah is about to offer another desperate rationalization, probably saying it's just an old, empty house, the universe interrupts her, there is a sharp knock on their door.
Enter the harbinger.
They open it, and standing there is an old woman. The narrative takes its time describing her using very specific adjectives. She's very small. She has white hair. And she has strange, pale eyes.
In folklore and literary analysis, this character archetype is unmistakable. She is the harbinger.
The one who warns them.
Right. And her physical description is crucial. Those strange, pale eyes immediately code her as a visionary figure, someone who sees the world differently, someone whose vision penetrates the veil of normalcy that Sarah is trying so hard to maintain.
It makes sense that her eyes are the focus.
In evolutionary biology, humans are hyper-attuned to eye contact. Eyes that look strange or unusual trigger a deep subconscious alert system in our brains.
Well, she certainly triggers an alert. She introduces herself as Mrs. Gray from number 7, and there is no welcoming small talk.
No housewarming gifts.
Definitely not. No
Well-
casserole to welcome them to the block. She looks past Alex and Sarah, her pale eyes fixing on the end of the street, and she simply says, "I see you looking at the house."
She just bypasses all the social pleasantries and cuts directly to the central, unspoken tension. She forces the issue into the open.
And Alex, to his credit, is honest. He admits they were looking. He tells her about the disturbances, the music box, and specifically the light they saw in the top floor window.
And how does Mrs. Gray respond?
Her response is absolutely immovable. The audio implies she becomes very still. And she states, with absolute authority, there was no light. Sarah, still clinging to logic, tries to correct her. She insists that they both saw, physical photons hitting their retinas, but Mrs. Gray shuts it down completely. She says, there was no light. That house has had no electricity for 30 years.
That specific line is a devastating blow to Sarah's worldview.
Why is that the tipping point?
Because by introducing a concrete physical impossibility, a house disconnected from the grid for 3 decades, Mrs. Gray entirely shatters Sarah's theory about a quirky new neighbor. You cannot have a light on without power.
It's physically impossible.
Right. She forces Alex and Sarah to confront a paradox. They saw a light. The light cannot exist. Therefore, what they saw was not of the natural world.
It completely corners them into accepting the supernatural. And once she has destroyed their rationalizations, Mrs. Gray delivers the lore. She tells them about the White family, a father, a mother, and 2 children who lived there in 1962.
The origin story.
Yeah, and she explains that one night the entire family disappeared. She says, no explanation, no goodbye, just gone.
The specific details of this disappearance are really what elevate the narrative from a standard ghost story into profound psychological horror.
Because it's not a bloody crime scene.
Exactly.
Mrs. Gray lists these impossible, stark facts. The doors to the house were locked from the inside. Nothing of value was taken. The dining table was perfectly set for dinner, and the food on the plates was still warm.
We see shades of the Mary Celeste here.
The ghost ship.
Yeah, the infamous ship found drifting with the crew vanished and the cargo untouched. This taps into the Zeigarnik effect in psychology.
The what effect?
The Zeigarnik effect. It states that the human brain remembers uncompleted or interrupted tasks much better than completed ones. A set table with warm food is a violently interrupted task.
That makes total sense.
The horror isn't found in a bloody, chaotic crime scene. It's found in the sudden, inexplicable absence of life. The detail of the warm food implies instantaneous removal.
Like they were just deleted.
Yes. They didn't pack a bag, they didn't flee, they were existing in their mundane reality 1 second, and they were erased from the physical world the next, without disturbing a single fork.
It creates a locked room mystery that defies physics. How do 4 people vanish from a house locked from the inside? Alex, visibly shaken by this, tries to find some distance from the horror. He points out that this happened a long time ago.
He's trying to relegate the threat to the past.
Right, like it's ancient history, it can't hurt us now. But Mrs. Gray doesn't let him. She counts on her fingers, and she delivers a horrifying statistic. Since the White family vanished in 1962, 7 people have gone inside that house, and 0 have come back out.
She fundamentally shifts the nature of the threat right there. It is not historical, it is active, and it is hungry.
She gives them an explicit, rigid warning. Do not look at the house at night, and never, ever go near it. And then she just turns and walks away, offering a totally deadpan, welcome to the neighborhood.
Oh, what an exit.
But this brings up a massive question for me about how this world operates. Let's use a mundane analogy, right?
Okay.
If there is a massive pothole on Main Street that blows out the tires of 7 different cars, the city council loses its mind. They send a public works crew, they surround it with orange cones, they shut down the lane, and they fix it. It's a public hazard.
Naturally.
But here, we have a residential property that has literally consumed 7 human beings.
Oh.
Where are the police? Where is the yellow crime scene tape? Why is the FBI not excavating the basement? How does this neighborhood just quietly coexist with a literal death trap at the end of the cul-de-sac?
That is the exact friction the story wants you to feel. You're looking for systemic logic in a space governed by nightmare logic.
Nightmare logic.
Yes. In a nightmare, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking, logic, and questioning absurdities, is largely suppressed.
So you just roll with it.
You do. You don't ask why you have a math test you haven't studied for while standing in your childhood kitchen. You simply accept the terror of the situation. The narrative demands the listener accept the rules of this specific micro-universe.
Even if it doesn't make logical sense.
Right. The neighborhood doesn't call the police because, within the nightmare logic of the story, the house is an immutable fact of nature. You don't call the police on a hurricane, you just board up your windows. The anomaly is accepted as a localized law of physics.
Wow. It's just a grim reality they quietly navigate around.
Exactly. And Mrs. Gray functions as the physical embodiment of the boundary within that nightmare logic. She is the gatekeeper. She tells him exactly where the safe zone ends. To ignore her explicit instructions is to willingly cross the boundary out of the normal world where police and logic exist and step directly into the domain of the anomaly.
But, as we know, human curiosity is the most fatal flaw of all.
It always is.
If you tell someone a door has swallowed 7 people without a trace, a terrible primal part of their brain desperately wants to look at the door. They want to know how. And almost the second Mrs. Gray is out of earshot, Alex whispers that he just wants to look through the window. He thinks he can approach the edge of the abyss without falling in.
Which brings us to the disastrous evening stroll.
Exactly. They wait until that very evening. The audio signals a change in the weather. The narrator describes dark clouds rolling in and the wind picking up, getting stronger.
Setting the mood.
Sarah is walking with Alex, but she is loudly complaining. She says, "I cannot believe I'm doing this." She makes it very clear she is only there to stop Alex from doing something impulsive and stupid on his own.
And her presence is driven entirely by loyalty, not by the fatal curiosity that drives Alex. She actually acts as the proxy for the listener's own reluctance.
Oh, like she's our voice of reason.
Exactly. She is the voice of reason being physically dragged into a zone of unreason. Her reluctance actually heightens the tension because she is hyper-aware of the danger they are walking into.
And as they walk down the street, getting closer to the dead grass, the environmental storytelling ramps up in a profoundly unsettling way. The ambient noise of the neighborhood fades. The wind, which was just described as getting stronger, abruptly stops.
Total silence.
Yeah. Sarah stops walking and points out a sensory void to Alex. She says, "The birds. There are birds everywhere on this street. But near this house, nothing. No birds, no insects, complete silence."
This is a highly sophisticated use of acoustic ecology to signify extreme danger. We often think of horror as loud, jump scares, screeching strings, screaming.
Quiet, lots of noise to startle you.
But here, the absence of sound is the weapon. Biologists call this the cone of silence.
Cone of silence.
Yeah, when an apex predator like a tiger or a wolf enters a forest ecosystem, the biophony, the ambient sounds of the birds, the frogs, the insects, it drops to absolute zero. The animals freeze to avoid detection.
That makes a lot of sense.
And humans have evolved over millions of years to subconsciously recognize that sudden drop in ambient noise. When the birds stop singing, our primal brain registers that a predator is hunting. By describing the sudden total silence, the narrative is subliminally triggering the listener's evolutionary alarm system.
It's telling us Alex and Sarah have walked into a predator's hunting ground.
Precisely.
They reached the front gate of the property. The text describes it as black iron, old, and very heavy. And Alex notes almost a surprise that the heavy gate is standing open. Sarah, locked in this fatalistic dread, just replies, "Of course it is."
That line is brilliant. Of course it is. It's an absolute acknowledgement of the trap. The house isn't just a passive structure. It's an active participant. It is holding the door open for them.
They walk up the path, flanked by the dead brown grass, and then Sarah points to the front door of the house. It isn't standing wide open. It is open just a tiny bit, just a few centimeters.
Just a crack.
And I have to say, that tiny crack of dark space is infinitely more terrifying than a door that is fully open or fully closed.
Psychologically, a closed door is a firm boundary. It says keep out. A fully wide open door is a revelation. It offers all its information at once, allowing you to assess the room from a distance.
You can see everything inside.
Right. But a door open just a few centimeters is a mystery. It's a lure. It obscures vision and demands engagement. It forces you to step closer, to lean in, to focus your attention into a narrow slit of darkness. It forces you to become an active participant in your own terror.
Which is exactly what Alex does. He tries to maintain some illusion of control, insisting they're only going to look through the front window, and absolutely under no circumstances are they going inside.
Famous last words.
They step off the path and approach the glass. The narrator says it's very dark inside, but slowly their eyes adjust.
This physiological detail, their eyes adjusting to the dark, it perfectly mirrors the cognitive experience of the listener.
How so?
Well, you are listening to a foreign language, squinting into the darkness of the syntax, trying to make out the shapes of the meaning.
Oh, that's a brilliant parallel.
Oh.
Sarah describes what she can make out in the gloom. An old hallway, faded wallpaper peeling off the walls, a wooden staircase. And then her eyes find the dining room. She sees the table, the very table from Mrs. Gray's story.
The proof.
Yes. Sarah's voice becomes breathless in the audio. She says, the plates are still there. After all these years, like they were waiting for dinner.
The visual confirmation of the plates is the exact moment the lore becomes reality. The impossible story Mrs. Gray told is suddenly anchored in physical proof. It tells the characters that the past is not gone. It is preserved, sitting in the dark, gathering dust.
Alex instantly recalls the detail about the warm food. The history is suffocating them. But just as they are processing the table, Sarah suddenly grabs Alex's arm. She violently shifts their attention away from the ground floor.
Upward.
She points up to the top floor window, the window where they saw the light the night before. Alex slowly tilts his head up, and the text delivers this image in slow motion. It says, in the top window, a shape, a figure, standing completely still, looking down at them.
The mechanics of pacing here are critical to the pedagogy. The story artificially forces the reader and the characters to slow down their breathing and their processing.
Sarah asks in a terrified whisper if it is a person. Alex says he doesn't know. Sarah observes the shape and says, it is not moving. And Alex responds, neither are we.
The freeze response.
And then the narrator notes explicitly that Alex and Sarah stand completely still, frozen on the dead grass for 5 long seconds.
In an audio medium, especially one designed for language learning, a 5-second pause is an absolute eternity.
Feels like an hour.
It does. It creates this auditory void. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the human mind abhors dead air. The listener fills those 5 seconds of silence with their own rising panic, imagining the figure staring down at them.
Your mind just races.
And the beginner-level syntax is doing incredible heavy lifting here. Short, declarative sentences. It is not moving. Neither are we. It strips away complex grammar and leaves only the staccato, pounding rhythm of a racing heartbeat.
And after those agonizing 5 seconds of complete paralysis, the static image breaks. Sarah says, Alex, it just moved. It moved closer to the glass.
The threat becomes active.
The shadow becomes a kinetic, active threat. And Alex's response is pure, unadulterated survival instinct. He doesn't scream. He says in a low, intense voice, walk. Walk now. Don't run. Just walk.
That is so smart.
And immediately we hear the rapid sound effects of footsteps crunching on dead grass, moving fast but not sprinting.
This is an incredibly precise psychological beat.
Think about what you're told to do if you encounter a mountain lion or a grizzly bear in the wild. The absolute worst, most fatal thing you could do is turn your back and sprint away.
Because running triggers the predator's prey drive.
Exactly. It flips a switch in their brain that says, that is food and the chase has begun. Alex's instinct to walk, don't run, demonstrates that his nervous system has recognized they're dealing with an apex predator.
He's trying to de-escalate.
He is trying to retreat from its territory without triggering the house to strike. It takes massive willpower for the motor cortex to override the amygdala's screaming demand to run for your life.
And this is where the pedagogy becomes brilliant. The lesson is tying basic vocabulary verbs, walk, run, move, to a life or death adrenaline spike.
You're feeling the words.
Exactly. The listener isn't just memorizing the difference between walk and run. They are feeling the biological imperative of those words. The emotional intensity permanently cements the vocabulary in the brain.
Having successfully executed that controlled retreat, the couple manages to get off the property and back to the safety of their apartment. But the physical escape does not equal psychological
But
safety.
where am I?
Because once you've seen the impossible, you have to find a way to live with it. And that leads directly into the psychological aftermath and a devastating revelation.
They survive the physical encounter at the window, but the psychological toll of what they witnessed is about to demand payment.
We find them back in their apartment, and the contrast to the dark house is sharp. Every single light in the apartment is turned on. They are sitting at their kitchen table drinking hot tea.
Trying to get warm.
Sarah is staring at her mug, trying to reassure herself. She notes that her hands are shaking, but she insists she is okay. Alex agrees with her, though the narrator explicitly notes that his voice sounds not very convincingly.
They're both lying to themselves.
And almost immediately, despite everything, they fall right back into their old, desperate habit. They try to rationalize the figure in the window.
The human need for a logical framework is incredibly resilient. Even after looking directly into the abyss, the brain scrambles.
It was dark. Maybe it was just a reflection, our own reflection in the glass.
Nice try, Alex.
But Sarah, whose mind is much sharper in this moment, dismantles his logic with basic geometry. She points out that they were standing on the ground, looking up. The figure was on the second floor, looking down.
Right.
A piece of glass cannot reflect an image from below up to a second-story angle like that. It violates the laws of physics.
It just doesn't work.
Alex tries another weak theory. He says, well, maybe the wind moved a curtain. Sarah shuts that down instantly, reminding him they specifically noted there were no curtains in any of the black windows.
She is not letting him off the hook.
Alex finally sighs, slumps his shoulders, and admits, I don't know.
The safety net of logic has been systematically dismantled. Sarah has cut off every single avenue of denial. They are left in a state of total, raw vulnerability with no defenses left against the truth.
And precisely at that moment of ultimate vulnerability, when their psychological shields are down, there's a sharp knock on their apartment door.
Perfect timing.
They both practically jump out of their skin. Alex goes to the door, opens it carefully, and there is Mrs. Gray. But she isn't empty-handed this time. She is holding a small, very old, leather-bound book. She steps past Alex into the apartment, looks at them, and her first words are a direct accusation. She says, "You went to the house."
Alex is stunned and asks how she could possibly know that.
Because they just got back.
Her response is simple and chilling. She says, I always know. Within the nightmare logic of this neighborhood, Mrs. Gray functions almost as an omniscient observer. She is deeply attuned to the rhythmic pulse of the anomaly. She feels it when the boundary is breached.
She sits down at their table, placing the old book between them. She declares that she is going to tell them the full, unvarnished truth because they need to know. She opens the book, revealing that it is a diary.
The Diary of Thomas White.
Specifically, the 14-year-old son of the family that vanished in 1962. She begins to explain that one night in November, the family sat down for dinner, just like any other night. But something came into the house with them.
Something nameless.
Something that had no name, and that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time.
This fundamentally shifts the listener's understanding of the threat. We are no longer dealing with the ghost of a tragic victim haunting a hallway.
Like a standard haunting.
Right. We are dealing with an entity, an ancient, nameless, parasitic presence.
Alex, trying to grasp the mechanics of this thing, asks what kind of something it is. What does it want? And Mrs. Gray's answer subverts every single expectation we have about horror monsters.
It really does.
She says it is a creature that feeds on warmth. It feeds on light. It feeds on love. She looks at them and says, a family full of happiness that is exactly what it wanted.
This is a terrifying and brilliant inversion of narrative values. Usually in Gothic or supernatural fiction, what is the monster attracted to?
Darkness, sin, fear, or misery.
Exactly. Light and love are typically the weapons used to banish the monster. But here, the entity is a psychological parasite that feeds exclusively on positive human emotion. It actively targets happiness.
That's so twisted.
That means that warmth, love, and familial joy are not a shield against the darkness. They are the exact bait that attracts the predator.
I want to pause on that because it's such a disturbing concept. I can't help but compare the house to a pitcher plant. Have you ever seen those carnivorous plants?
Oh yeah, the ones shaped like deep cups.
Right. They are beautiful, and they exude a sweet, intoxicating nectar that lures a fly or a beetle inside the rim. The insect slips on the waxy surface, falls into the digestive fluid at the bottom, and is slowly consumed. But the house is worse.
Because it uses people as the bait.
Exactly. It uses the trapped white family and their tragic frozen state as the sweet nectar to attract the next victim. It lures empathetic, curious people like Alex and Sarah. The 7 people who went in to investigate weren't just random victims. They were the next meal, lured into the pitcher plant by their own compassion.
A pitcher plant is a very evocative visual, but I would argue it misses one crucial, terrifying element.
What's that?
Malice. A pitcher plant operates on blind biological instinct. It doesn't know it's killing, it just needs nitrogen. But an entity that specifically seeks out happiness and love to consume implies a level of dark consciousness.
It knows what it's doing.
It requires an understanding of human joy in order to digest it. It's not just a biological trap, it's a mechanism of psychological cruelty.
That makes it so much worse. And it gets worse still. Sarah asks the terrible, logical question. She asks, and it took them. It killed them.
The ultimate question.
Mrs. Gray looks at her and delivers the massive, paradigm-shifting twist of the story. She says, it kept them. There is a difference.
That distinction, the chasm between being taken and being kept, is the black core of this narrative's horror.
Mrs. Gray proves it by reading from Thomas's diary. She reads the very last entry he ever wrote from the night they vanished in 1962. Thomas wrote, "Something is in the house with us. It has been here for days. It stands in the corners. It watches us at the table.
He knew.
Father says it is nothing, but I can feel it. It is hungry." The boy knew. The child perceived the threat while the father denied it.
Exactly the same way Sarah tried to deny the music box. But the boy knew they were being hunted.
And the diary entry provides a first-person historical account of the entity's methodology.
It doesn't attack like an animal, it infiltrates. It observes from the corners of the room, slowly encroaching on the safe spaces, waiting until it is intimately close before it springs the trap.
And as Mrs. Gray finishes reading, the horrible realization hits Sarah. Her brain connects the dots between the diary and the shape she just saw at the window. She realizes that Thomas was described as a tall, 14-year-old boy.
The pieces fall into place.
He whispers in absolute horror the figure in the window, and Mrs. Gray nods, confirming it. She says, "They're all still there, kept, like the warm food at the dinner table, kept exactly as they were, still waiting."
This introduces the profound existential horror of stasis, being completely frozen in time. The White family are not ghosts. They haven't crossed over.
We're just trapped.
They are living specimens preserved in a terrarium by an entity that is slowly, endlessly feeding off their trapped warmth and their fading hope. It is a fate infinitely worse than a sudden death. It is an eternal, unchanging captivity in the dark.
The psychological weight of that stasis is suffocating. Mrs. Gray tells them that the family is just waiting, hoping someone will find a way to bring them out. But she immediately warns Alex and Sarah that trying to save them is a deeply foolish and dangerous thing to attempt.
Pointing again to the 7 people who failed.
Yes, who became trapped themselves. Having delivered this devastating burden of knowledge, Mrs. Gray stands up to leave. She walks to the door, opens it, and pauses. She turns back to Alex and Sarah and delivers her final, chilling piece of advice. She says, "Sleep well tonight. Keep your lights on."
As a piece of narrative design, this moment is phenomenal.
Because she's talking to us.
Yes. Within the context of the story, Mrs. Gray is giving practical advice to Alex and Sarah. Protect yourselves from a creature that operates in the darkness. But functionally, mechanically, because this is an audio experience, the voice actor is speaking that line directly into the ear of the listener.
It's a massive, jarring break of the fourth wall.
Exactly. Think back to the very first minute of the recording. The narrator explicitly commanded the listener, "Now, turn off the lights." The listener obeyed. They have been sitting in the dark for 30 minutes.
Building up all that tension.
The audio has meticulously filled that darkness with the concept of a nameless entity that stands in the corners and hunts happy people. And then, a character inside the story turns and tells the listener, "Keep your lights on."
It's terrifying.
It shatters the boundary between the fictional world of the audiophile and the physical reality of the listener's bedroom. It makes the listener instinctively look over their shoulder into the dark corners of their own room.
It is so incredibly effective. I felt my own heart rate spike. After Mrs. Gray leaves the apartment, the silence left behind is incredibly heavy. Alex starts to say something to Sarah, but she holds up a hand to stop him.
She doesn't want to hear any more theories.
No more rationalizations.
Hmm?
Alex finishes his thought anyway, in a very small voice. He said, "I was just going to say keep the lights on." And Sarah, finally and completely abandoning all her previous denial, just replies, "Agreed."
The terror of the night is complete. They have fully surrendered to the rules of the nightmare. They are no longer trying to explain it away. They're just trying to survive it.
And that surrender brings us to the morning and the final sequence of the narrative. The terror of the night gives way to the pale light of dawn, but instead of the relief we usually feel when surviving a horror movie night, the story pivots.
It changes completely.
It moves away from primal fear and into a profound sense of tragedy, culminating in a very surprising linguistic twist.
This tonal shift is really what elevates the material. It stops being a simple scare tactic and becomes a lasting emotional meditation.
It's early morning. The text notes a pale gray light. The birds are singing again, but the audio makes a point to clarify, not near the end of the street.
The silence is still there.
Sarah is sitting by the window, staring out. She admits to Alex that she did not sleep at all. Alex agrees he didn't either. And then Sarah voices the thought that is haunting her. It isn't fear for her own safety anymore. She says, I keep thinking about Thomas. 14 years old, still in that house for 60 years.
Notice the transition from fear to profound empathy. During the night, Sarah's primary emotion was self-preservation. She was terrified of the monster.
But now she's thinking of the victims.
Right. In the morning light, her focus shifts entirely to mourning the victims. She is consumed by the unimaginable suffering of a teenage boy trapped in a state of suspended animation for 6 decades.
The empathy is overwhelming her. She turns to Alex and says, someone should help them. She wants to act. She wants to be the hero. But Alex serves as the anchor of harsh reality. He absolutely refuses.
He has to.
He reminds her of the brutal math. Sarah. 7 people went in, none came out. Sarah tries to argue, suggesting that maybe if they research, if they find the right knowledge, they could do it. But Alex just shakes his head and keeps saying no.
Alex represents the necessary boundary of self-preservation here. He acknowledges the immense tragedy, but he refuses to let his empathy turn him into victim number 8.
He understands the trap.
He understands the pitcher plant nature of the trap we discussed earlier. He knows that compassion is exactly what the house uses to consume you.
There is a long, heavy pause in the dialogue as they both stand at their window, looking down the street toward the dark house. The house is completely silent. The top window is pitch black. And then Sarah does something incredibly moving and entirely futile.
What does she do?
She speaks to the silent house through her own closed window. She says in a very soft, steady voice, Thomas, I hope you can hear us. We know you are there. We have not forgotten you.
It is a pure act of witnessing. She knows she cannot physically walk through the iron gate and save him, but she can offer him the singular dignity of being seen. She is validating his existence, refusing to let him be erased by the dark.
And the incredible thing is, the house responds. The narrator describes the wind moving gently through the street. And somewhere, down in the end of the block, a curtain in that top floor window shifts.
Just a little bit.
Just slightly. Just enough to show that someone, or something, heard her. Alex, who had been so rigidly against engaging with the house, softens in that moment. He looks at the shifting curtain and softly promises to the glass, we will find a way. Something.
That is heartbreaking.
And the scene fades out with the narrator, noting that the street is still quiet, but somehow less cold than before.
That slight shift of the curtain is a beautiful, tragic moment of connection across the impossible boundary of the stasis. It doesn't solve the problem, but it acknowledges the shared humanity.
Following this quiet resolution, the narrator returns for the outro. The pulsing, scary music is gone, replaced by soft, warm chords. His voice is described as careful and comforting.
De-escalating the tension.
He reflects on Alex and Sarah, living their lives right next door to this 60-year-old sadness. He states that some mysteries simply stay unsolved. But he suggests that perhaps sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply to remember, to say, I have not forgotten you.
Reframing the whole story.
He frames the act of remembering as an act of quiet defiance against the dark. And then he speaks directly to the listener one last time, assuring them that they are safe. He says, whatever is in the dark, it cannot reach you here.
The narrator is officially ending the simulation. He is returning the listener safely to the reality of their study space, de-escalating the massive physiological and psychological tension he spent the last 35 minutes building.
But the experience doesn't actually end with his sign-off. If you look at the source material, it concludes with a physical study guide, a key vocabulary list.
And this is the twist.
This is where the genius of the entire project crystallizes. It lists English words with their direct Bengali translations. We see basic nouns like curtain translated to parda and electricity to bid you.
The beginner words.
But then, intermixed with the basics, we see complex, high-level vocabulary. We see words like disappeared, convincingly, adjust, breathless, reflection, supernatural, and feeds on.
This reveals the specific target demographic of the lesson, Bengali speakers who are learning English. And it showcases the brilliant mechanism of this pedagogy.
Connecting the emotion to the words.
Exactly. It takes the entirely abstract experience of dread, empathy, and horror and anchors it into concrete, translatable linguistic meaning.
It's astonishing. Because at the end of the day, this profound meditation on memory and eternal captivity is, functionally, just a language learning tool.
Mm.
But consider what it achieves. By connecting massive emotional weight, the primal fear of a predator hunting you in the dark, or the deep, aching empathy for a child trapped for 60 years to vocabulary words like disappeared and supernatural, the lesson ensures that the listener will never forget those English words.
The cognitive science validating this approach is rock solid. Neurologically, we know that high emotional arousal significantly improves memory retention.
Because of the adrenaline.
Yes. When you experience fear or profound empathy, your amygdala, the emotional processing center of the brain, it lights up. The amygdala sits right next to the hippocampus, which is the brain's memory center.
So they interact.
Highly. When the amygdala is highly stimulated, it essentially stamps the memory being formed in the hippocampus with a chemical marker that says, "This is critical for survival, do not forget this."
Oh, wow. That's why trauma is so hard to forget.
This is why we have flashbulb memories of traumatic or highly emotional events. If you just read the phrase "feeds on" off a chalkboard, your brain discards it in 10 minutes. But if you learn the phrase "feeds on" while your heart is pounding because an ancient entity is consuming the happiness of a trapped family,
It stays with you forever.
that phrase is seared into your neural pathways permanently.
It is the pedagogy of fear, evolved to its highest form. And conceptually, it's so incredibly appropriate because the act of learning a completely new language as an adult is inherently about trying to navigate the unknown.
It is its own kind of darkness.
It's about staring at a page of symbols you don't understand, feeling lost, and trying to make sense of them. It feels exactly like standing on the sidewalk, staring into a dark house at the end of the street, trying to see what's inside.
Precisely. You are navigating in the dark, searching for the light of comprehension. This story takes the inherent discomfort and cognitive dissonance of not knowing the language and channels it directly into the narrative suspense of not knowing what is in the house. It's a perfect alignment of form and function.
It really is an incredible journey. We've gone from a very simple, incredibly relatable tale about the anxiety of finding an apartment with cheap rent, and we've drilled all the way down into the neurobiology of fear, the mechanics of nightmare logic, and the profound power of empathy.
All wrapped up in an English lesson.
And it was all packaged inside an English lesson plan. It perfectly highlights how powerful simple, beginner-level words can be when they are arranged with precision and purpose.
It proves definitively that you do not need complex, baroque, purple prose to create lasting terror or emotional resonance. Sometimes a short 3-word sentence like, "It is not moving," followed by 5 seconds of dead silence, is the most terrifying and memorable thing in the world.
It absolutely is. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over. Think back to Alex's final line, his quiet, stubborn promise as he looks at the dark window. We will find a way, someday.
It's a noble thought.
It's a beautiful sentiment. But it carries a terrible, practical weight. Imagine your own street. If you knew, for an absolute fact, that a family was trapped in a house 3 doors down from you, frozen in time since 1962, waiting in the dark for someone to rescue them. How many nights could you actually sleep in your own bed with your lights on?
But proximity would drive you crazy.
How long could you withstand the weight of that proximity before you, just like the 7 doomed people before you, finally decided to walk down that quiet street and open that heavy iron gate?
It really forces you to ask yourself a very difficult question. How much unresolved tragedy are you capable of living next to before your empathy overrides your survival instinct?
And on that truly chilling note, we want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the unknown. As the narrator promised you, take a slow, deep breath. You are safe in your room. Whatever is in the dark, it cannot reach you here. We'll catch you next time.